Hey, sports card fans. It's John, Wade Boggs fan. Hope everyone's doing well. The topic for this video is a somewhat polarizing topic within the hobby, and that is sports card grading. Some are for grading sports cards, others are against, and some fall in the middle. But what I thought I would do is, from my perspective, talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of grading sports cards. Now, you may disagree with some of my pros and cons. You may have other pros and cons that I may have missed. So, I would like to hear from you as to what your thoughts are from your personal collecting standpoint of whether you like getting cards graded or whether you prefer raw cards in your collection. And there is no right answer. The only answer that is right is the one that is right for you and that you enjoy. But since the topic of grading has come up many times, I thought I would give my viewpoint. I don't think any of these pros and cons are necessarily um, original or ones that have not been talked about before, but I thought I would put a video together and just discuss this topic of the hobby. So let's start off with some of the pros, the good in grading sports cards. The first one is it gives the collector an independent assessment of the grade of a card. Now, I could look at a card and I may say it is very good to excellent. Now, let's look at from a vantage of vintage cards. Okay, modern cards, the degree of whether it's gem mint or whatever. Um, Generally speaking, you get more of a disparity um, with vintage cards. So again, I could look at a card and say this is VG excellent, and another person may look at it and say, well, no, I think this is more VG, um, and so there could be a differing opinion. So having a card graded has that independent third party assessment of the grade of a particular card. Now, we'll get into some of the downsides of that when I go into the cons, but I think there is something to say about when you're buying or selling a card to have not the buyer or seller chime in on what the card may be graded and hence worth, but someone independent outside of a transaction of what that card grade really is. Okay. Another pro is that, in my opinion, it's easier to determine comps or comparables. So when I'm looking for a vintage card, I can go, if I see that it is a PSA 5, all right, I can go to PSA's website, check the most recent sales of that particular card in a PSA 5, and I have a general sense of what they've been selling for. And so then I can determine what price, if I want to go after that card, I'd be willing to pay. Without that grading system, so if I'm going out and buying a raw card, well, PSA or the other grading companies don't track non-graded sales, right? So you can go to eBay and check out the eBay sold listings, all right? But again, you're looking at a card. Sometimes photograph of that card is not the best, all right? Sometimes they don't show the back of the card, they only show the front. And you're not sure, so you can go through all the listings and you may see that a particular raw card may go, for example, $10, and then you'll see ones go for $100. Well, to try to filter through all those sold listings to find cards that you think may be in the same condition as this other raw card that you're looking to buy, it just makes it, in my opinion, harder to determine what I may want to pay for a particular raw card. Um, Again, that's just me, and others out there, you may have other methods that you use to determine what a particular card may be worth. Now, you may be saying, John, you collect Wade Boggs cards and you rarely buy graded copies, and that is true. The very, very few graded cards I have in my Wade Boggs collection were ones that the seller had graded, and but I've never submitted any of my Wade Boggs cards to get graded. So you may say, John, well, how do you know how much to pay for a certain Wade Boggs card because it's not graded? And it's only because I've been collecting Boggs cards for so long, I know whether it's a serial numbered card, non-serial numbered card. I know the relative rarity because I've been focused on Wade Boggs cards for so long. I have a general sense of the market price of a particular Wade Boggs card. Okay, sometimes I get surprised. Something sells for way more than I think it would. Sometimes I put in a bid that I think it is, and I get it for a steal. So it's still not perfect, right? But if I were to go out and buy a raw copy of some vintage card, okay, that I haven't collected a lot of that player or a lot of that year, um, I may not know as much to say, hey, that's a pretty good price because I think that would grade at a certain grade, and I think it would go for this, or I'm comfortable paying X for it. So again, for me, especially buying graded cards, vintage cards, having that data from, say, PSA. I don't know if the other grading companies have the tracking of their sales, but I know for PSA they do. Um, it's it's a lot easier for me getting into the vintage market or collecting vintage cards that I can tell roughly how much a card is going for, how much it should sell for, and whether I want to buy it at that grade. Maybe I'm forced to look at a lower grade because a 6, I can't afford a 6 because I know any 6 that comes up for auction is going to be in that certain range. So it helps me when I buy vintage to buy graded, again, because it's easier for me to determine what to pay for it. Another one is the pop reports. So I believe all the major grading companies have pop reports. So that's good for not only vintage, but also for modern collecting, modern cards. Is the pop reports give you a relative idea of the population or how many cards out there are in a particular grade. So you can determine, okay, wait, this card has in a PSA 10, this modern card in a PSA 10, there are 5,000 10s. Okay, that gives you a relative sense of what the market, the interest, because a lot of people are submitting cards, that particular card for grading. Um, there could be a relative high pop compared to another player, and again, you can use that to determine maybe there is a buying opportunity for a particular card based on the pop of that card in a particular grade. Registries is another pro in my book again. And I believe PSA is the only one that has a registry. And what I mean by registry, if you're not familiar, is um, there are categories or registries, they call them sets, that you can go after. So the registries of graded cards, and again, particular PSA, can mean a whole new way to collect cards. I know for me, when I decided to venture into vintage cards after collecting Wade Boggs cards for so long, is that I wanted to go PSA, and the reason being is the registry. So I wanted to go after the Hall of Famers for a particular year. So I'm working on, the late 70s, 1980 sets. And so my goal is to get all the Hall of Famers for that year. So when I get a card, I can enter it into the registry. I can see where I am. Not that to me, not that it's a really competition, but I know for others, um, boy, ranking a certain level on that PSA registry for a certain set, and a set isn't the set necessarily as you may collect a set of cards, but whatever the topic or registry set is, you can go after, you can try to complete it. It gives you a challenge. And for a lot of those that enjoy graded cards, that is one way to enjoy the hobby, to have a focus, to have a challenge, to go after is to complete a PSA registry set. And like I said, I know for the 1978 Topps Baseball Hall of Famers that I'm going after, I think I'm down to 4. So when I get those final 4, it's going to me, it's going to be a satisfaction that I completed something. And so I've completed the 78s. Then I'll maybe go to the 79s and say, okay, I need 10 more or something like that. So I want to focus on getting those last 10. So again, it's another way to enjoy the hobby. Another pro to grading, in my opinion, is that you get a better return on your money if you sell a card that's graded versus raw. And again, that goes back to my first point of that independent assessment of grade. So if I wanted to sell one of my cards that is raw, hey, I can do the best description, the best honest description of the card, but hands down, it'll sell less raw than if I sold it as a PSA 6. The fact that it has that independent third party grade assigned to it, it's protected, it's all the other things, I'll get more money for that card graded a PSA 6 than I would if it was a excellent mint, okay, raw card. The next to last pro that I have is that it protects the card. Having it graded, having it sealed. Now you may say, John, a card in a penny sleeve and a top loader or a mag case will still protect the card, and you're right, but not as much as that PSA or other slab would protect the card. May not protect, the slab would protect it from any potential water damage. Now, not fire, of course, but it does give, if you put a card in, I know some of my Wade Boggs cards, depending on the thickness of the card, fits in a penny sleeve, but it may just be in between one of the sizes of a top loader. So I've had cases where I'm going through cards and the card almost slips out of the top holder. So again, yeah, it protects it, but you still have to be careful with your card that it doesn't fall out of the top loader. Again, mag holders, sure, maybe more protection. They're a lot more expensive as well. I have over 5,200 different Wade Boggs cards. I'm not going to buy a mag holder for all of them, right? So a graded card protects the card more than it would if you had it raw and put it in a penny sleeve and top loader or even a mag holder. And the last sort of pro that I have is that from a presentation or display purpose, um, some like the graded holder. I've heard lots of comments, especially regarding SGC, the new SGC holders from the tuxedo, I guess, that I've seen lots of videos where collectors show off their latest card in a brand new SCG holder and say, "Wow, this just makes the card pop." And I would tend to agree. Maybe not so much. PSA. I think a lot of people think it's somewhat what of a bland holder. Some people may like the Beckett holders, um, but in some cases, some people may like how the card is presented in a holder versus raw, right? So let's take a look at maybe the bad, sort of the cons of grading cards. The first one that comes to mind is, which grading company do you go with? So I believe right now there are, well, four. There's three that have been around for a while, and a fourth that has recently come into the market. So you have PSA, SGC, you have Beckett, and now the new one is CSG, right? So then the question is, do I get my cards graded by PSA or Beckett? And I've seen lots of questions on Facebook groups, Twitter, and stuff like that saying, hey, what is the best grading card company to use? And some people say, well, for modern cards, you want to go Beckett. For pre war, you want to go SGC. For anything in between, you want to go PSA. Others don't like PSA at all. Others like SGC. And so you get a wide range of opinion of what company to go with. For me, some of my current vintage cards, or the ones I had um, earlier in my collection, I ended up getting graded through Beckett. And the only reason why I got them personally through Beckett is um, I didn't have a PSA account. I didn't want to spend the money to get into the collectors club or whatever that would allow me to then submit cards for grading. I didn't want to go through that whole process at the time. I don't know if it's changed, but I could just fill out a form, submit a entry to Beckett, and I could get my cards graded. Hindsight, and again, I didn't know anyone else in the hobby at the time that, hey, we do group PSA submissions, send me your cards and stuff like that. At the time, I didn't have those connections within the hobby, so I had to do it on my own. If I knew then what I knew now, I probably would have gone with PSA personally to have the cards graded. In fact, at some point in time, I can see myself switching over all the Beckett slabs to PSA slabs, because now that I've started a collection of vintage cards, I've started with PSA and I'm going to stick with PSA. Other collectors, they'll have cards of various grading companies. They don't mind. For me, I want I want my collection to be of just one grading company. That's just how I work, how I think. I want it all to be uniform. So the fact that I have some of my vintage cards in a Beckett slab, I want to get them switched over to PSA. So again, main question is, if you say, yeah, I want to get my card graded, who do you go with? And people think, well, for resale value or for this or whatever, PSA is better. But again, some people have an argument that depending on the card, maybe SGC is better. Or for newer modern cards, Beckett's the way to go. And of course, you have the new CSG. I'm still trying to remember that those letters there, CSG. They're new to the block, so we'll see what attention that they get, whether they get a hobby footing or not. Some may be hesitant to get their cards graded by them. Some may say, hey, I love the look of their slabs. They have I think a greenish, white and green looking slab. I have mixed feelings on the design of it. That's just me. Um, but some may be all in and trying that grading company. The next con is, well, it's more expensive to buy a card that's graded versus one that's raw. So if you're on a budget and you want a card of a particular player and you don't really care what the grade is, it may make sense for you not to buy a graded card and just buy a raw copy. So then there's really no benefit for you in collecting in having a graded card. So yeah, I mean just the pure cost of grading, and it's amazing how the price of a raw card in a particular grade, yet if it's slabbed and has a particular number, it could be 2, 3, 4 times what it may cost just to buy that card raw. Again, assuming that you're buying the same grade of raw versus what is you're comparing it to that's graded. So, but yes, it is definitely more expensive to buy a graded card than a raw copy. Another con is grading companies are not perfect. All right. One of my pros was, hey, you have a third party telling you this card is an 8. Okay. Well, how many listings have you seen on eBay that says, you know, uh, looks, looks better than an 8, or undergraded, or I've seen comments on Facebook posts or Twitter or whatever saying, "How the heck was this graded a 10? Look how off center it is. How is this a 10? Or look at that dinged corner. How was that? How was that graded a 9?" So there's always Monday morning quarterbacks, I guess you can call it, of looking at a graded card, and you still may think that the grading company got it wrong, right? And they may have. They're human as well. Now they have certain guidelines, and I guess now with they're trying to get more technology into grading and scanning and all that stuff, and maybe it will improve down the road. But it's still one person's opinion of the grade of that card, and you may disagree with that assigned grade. You may look over a raw card and see absolutely nothing wrong with it for a modern card. And I've seen, heard examples as well that, man, this is a sharp card. The corners, the surface, the edges, the center, you name it. And they get it back and it's a 9. And they say, what's wrong with it? I don't see, why didn't it not get a 10? Okay. Another con is that not all cards of a certain grade have the same eye appeal. So again, this is more on the vintage side that I'm talking about here. If you were to do an eBay search for a 1975 George Brett rookie card in a PSA 7, take a look at the different copies that are for sale. You may find one in a 7 that is pretty well centered. You may find ones that are really off center. You're going to say, well, that's a 7 as well. It may be left to right off, and another 7 may be off top to bottom. There may be one, like I said, there may be one dead centered. You could look at 6 different PSA 7 George Brett rookie cards, and they're all going to look different. The eye appeal is going to be different. So to me, that's just I understand how that can be, because there are 4 main grading criteria, right? And I talked about that in a previous video I did about which of the 4 grading criteria are more important to you when looking for cards. So you could have one card that's great on centering, but maybe a dinged corner that makes it a 7. You have another card with great corners, but the centering's off, and that could be a 7. So to me, I understand technically, from a technical standpoint, both cards are a 7. But to me, one between those two cards, one has better eye appeal than the other, and I'd be more interested in one of those cards than the other, even though they're graded the same. So to me, that grading system, to me, there's some inherent flaw in just the eye appeal. Another con, in my opinion, is that sometimes the price of a card, the price that it sells for, may not solely but predominantly based on the population, the graded population of that card. So, for example, here is a 1978 Topps Ted Simmons in a PSA 8 that I have in my collection. All right. Now, as an example of a card's price, selling price, okay, somewhat based on the graded population, to me is a con. And here's an example. For the 1978 Topps Ted Simmons, there are about, now this is just PSA, okay, there are about just under 300 total graded cards of the 78 Ted Simmons. There are 65 that received a 10, 171 that received a 9, and 42 that have an 8. So my 8 is one of 42 copies that have been graded an 8, and there are roughly 135, 140, or 240, 230, 240 that are graded higher, right? So if you wanted to buy a PSA 10, you're probably looking at spending around 220 bucks. If you wanted a PSA 9, you'd be in for about 55 bucks. And if you wanted an 8, which is the one that I bought, you'd be in for maybe 25 bucks. Okay? So, you're thinking, okay, 25 bucks for an 8 for Ted Simmons. Well, one of the reasons why there were only 300 cards graded of Ted Simmons is prior to him fairly recently being elected to the Hall of Fame, he just wasn't a majorly collected player. Once he hit the Hall of Fame, you had all those Hall of Fame collectors and the registry collectors and stuff, and so suddenly there was an interest now in Ted Simmons cards, graded cards. Well, up to that point, the population had been pretty low, but now the demand for his graded cards has gone up, so his prices for a PSA graded copy have gone up. If you wanted to buy a raw 78 Ted Simmons, you could be looking at paying $3 to $7, and that includes shipping, right? Not a very expensive card, okay? Considering some of the examples there, when you get to the $7, you're looking at maybe $4 shipping. So the card itself, outside of shipping, is a $1 to $3 card. Okay, yeah, it's a Hall of Famer, but it's sort of toward the end of his career, I think. But regardless, so as an example, Nolan Ryan, who is well collected, very popular in the hobby, all right, Hall of Famer in his own right. One can argue one of the best, greatest pitchers of all time. If you wanted to buy a 1978 Topps Nolan Ryan in a PSA 8, that would cost you only about 30 bucks. Why? Because there's about 1,000 Nolan Ryan cards that have been graded an 8, right? So even though the demand is high, the supply out there, you won't have a hard time finding a PSA 8 Nolan Ryan from 78. All right? But because the population for the Ted Simmons is so low, it commands a very similar price than Nolan Ryan. So it all depends, how much you may have to pay for a card may have less to do with the player and more to do with how many are out there, the supply demand thing. All right. Another con is that it may be hard to find a graded card of a particular player, especially in a particular grade. So here's an example of my 1979 Topps Bump Wills, right? And this is the error card where he's listed as being on the Blue Jays when he is actually on the Texas Rangers. Now, for me, I wanted this card graded because it's special to me. This was not this particular card because I bought this one graded, but I still have it the raw one in my collection, and that's what started me back in, really in 1979. I collected a little bit in 78, but that really got me interested in the hobby, knowing that I had this error card, right? So it holds a special place for me in my collection. So I wanted to get a PSA 9. Okay, the grade wasn't that important, but I figured a 9. Okay, so I was able to pick up the Blue Jays error. Now the population of in an 8, sorry, in a 9 is 155. No, sorry, the total population. Sorry, the total population of graded Bump Wheels cards in a Blue Jay is 155. So I was able to pick one up in a 9. I still haven't found, or should say, I haven't won the corrected version of him being listed on the Rangers yet. The total population that have been graded is only 106. In the last 12 months, there have only been 6 PSA 9s that have sold. And I missed out on the probably the last 3 or 4 since I started my vintage collecting. So again, trying to find a PSA 9 Bump Wills on the Rangers has been difficult, only because the population is so low. It's not that, boy, finding one in a 9 is so difficult because of centering issues or whatever. It's not a grade issue, it's a population issue. So it may take me a while to pick up a Bump Wills that is not going to cost me much. All right. I just can't find them because there aren't too many listed for sale at any given time. Right. So to me, that's a con of wanting it in a graded copy. Right. Set collectors. If you collect complete sets, right, unless you wanted to specifically grade some of the star cards or key cards in that set, most set collectors I know are just interested in completing the set raw, putting it in binders, being able to look through it. To get every single card in a set in a graded copy would cost a small fortune, depending on what set you're talking about and the grade that you get the cards in. So if one of your focuses is completing sets, grading just doesn't really make sense for you, like I said, unless you wanted to take some of the key cards and have them graded. Now, I'm working on 1978 Topps complete set. That entire set is going to be raw. I'm not going to get any graded cards. Reason being is I'm also working on the 1978 Topps Hall of Famers in PSA. So I'm going to have graded copies of the the Hall of Famers, but then I'm working on a raw complete set. So I don't want any of those cards graded. Maybe someday I'll put them in a binder. They may just be in a box. I don't know how I'm going to eventually store them, but I want to have a 1978 complete set, and to me that is going to be raw, and I have no interest whatsoever in getting any of those graded. Okay. last two here for the cons. And for some of you, and to me to some extent, is that if you have a card that's graded, you can't touch it, you can't feel it, and this is may sound weird to you, you can't smell it. Talking about vintage cards. Not too long ago, I did a video where I bought a near complete set of 1978 Topps cards, 575 cards, because I want to go through them, pick ones out for my 78 set, right? When I opened up that 800 count box, I could immediately smell the vintage nature of those 78 cards. And it just, for me, being collecting so long, 78 was my first set. You can tell when you have a stack of vintage cards that you know that they're vintage. You can the cardboard, the printing, whatever it is, I don't know what it is. Vintage cards just have that distinct smell to them that just, again, brings me back to when I was a kid collecting those cards. And again, it was pretty amazing that even after, being in storage, whoever the seller was had these in storage or whatever, put them in this 800 count box, and I opened it up and I could immediately smell those 78 cards. And to me, there's something special about that you're not going to get by having a card in a PSA slab. Okay. The last con is storage, right? So as you can see there, my library card catalog where I keep all my Wade Boggs cards. They're great for cards in top loaders, mag holders. I believe I can fit Beckett slabs, but PSA slabs are just slightly too long to fit in those individual drawers. So storage is an issue. Graded cards take up a lot more space than raw cards or even cards in top loaders and stuff. They're taller, wider, thicker. So if you have an issue in terms of displaying the cards, you can't put PSA, graded cards in a binder and look through them. All right. So storage, you may not like the fact that you may have to store graded cards a certain way that you may not be able to enjoy your cards as much. All right. So I've gone over the good, the bad. Now let's get to, in my opinion, the ugly of grading. Currently, as if you do anything with graded cards right now, turnaround times have been horrendous over the last year and a half. Now, at least for PSA, they've stopped all but one service altogether. So you can't even submit certain cards until they get caught up. Maybe by July, I think they said, but some people don't even think it will happen by then. So, yeah, you send your card away, hope it doesn't get lost, damage in the mail. You send it to them, and right now, I don't even know. Honestly, I didn't bother checking what all the grading companies' turnaround times are. I'm sure they're still in the months, right? So you can have your card out with them, and I've even seen some reveal videos where they say, "Hey, I got a submission back," and I'm like, "Oh yeah, I even forgot I sent that out. It's been so long. Oh yeah, I did send this card out to get graded." Turnaround time is just right now horrendous. I I don't know if even if PSA had all their different submission levels open, whether I would want to submit anything if I knew my card was going to be with them for 6, 9, 12 months. I don't know if it's worth it, and I think a lot of collectors out there are getting frustrated with the turnaround time, right? As sort of going along with those turnaround times, now it's getting more and more expensive to even get the cards graded. So you have a raw copy of a card. Okay, I want to send this in for grading. All right, well, depending if it's a vintage or modern or ultra modern, depending on what the estimated value of the card is, you could be looking at, I guess right now, with all the different grading companies, what, $30 is the minimum? So you're looking at $30 to get a card graded. So going back to my bump wills, I can say, okay, well, I can get a raw. I'll buy a raw copy of the corrected version in Texas Rangers, and I'll pay for shipping. I'll pay $30 to get it graded. I'll pay insurance to get and shipping to get it back, and all in. I may be in for $50 to get a bump wills graded, and for that particular card, and I know some of you out there, when you send a grade in, you're hoping for a certain grade. Okay, maybe, hey, a 10 would be great, but I'd love at least a 9, or for vintage cards, maybe you'd be happy, hey, I think this is a 4 and I hope it's a 4, whatever. Right? I would tend to think that most people submitting cards to get graded have a idea or a hope of what they want that card to come back graded as. So if I wanted to get that bump wills again, since I have the one of the Blue Jays in a 9, I would want a matching Rangers one in a 9. That's just how I'd want a 9. So with my luck, I'd find a card that I thought would be maybe grade a 9, buy it raw. So pay to buy that card that I hope is a 9, spend possibly $40 or more to get it graded, and if it would come back a 7, I'd be extremely disappointed and feel that I've wasted a lot of money. Right? So I'm going to hold off and try to buy one that I know that's already graded a 9. So I don't have to go through all that time and effort and expense and hope to get a card in a grade that I want. Right? So to me, the cost of just getting cards graded, depending on the card and depending on what grade you want or hope to get out of it, I don't know if I see necessarily the point sometimes in submitting cards to get graded. But again, that's just my opinion. Another opinion I have that is somewhat on the ugly side. And again, this is an area of the hobby that I'm not involved in. So again, this is just from my perspective. This is getting more into the investing, flipping side of the hobby. And again, I don't see anything wrong with people doing that. That's fine. If that's how they want to enjoy the hobby or do what they do, I have no problem with it. From an outsider, I just get the sense that so many people, and this is for the ultra modern cards, that everyone seems to be obsessed in getting a 10, a PSA 10. And it's like, oh, I think this is going to be a 10, or I don't think I'm going to submit it because I don't think it can be a 10. That they're focused and concentrated on a 10. And if a card comes back a 9, they're like completely deflated. And maybe it's because the price that they bought the card raw, they thought it was a 10 and paid a 10 price for it or whatever. I don't know. But again, from an outsider looking in on that aspect of the hobby, I would think that focus, that need to get a 10, I don't see as being very healthy. Now, there's more and more leaning toward, 9 is fine or something like that. It's a fine 9. So maybe that is getting less and less of an issue, that people are, still seeing the benefits of maybe a card coming back at 9. If it's a 10, great, but I'd be happy with a 9 type thing. So maybe that's not becoming as much of a ugly issue. And the last one is there have been some accusations in the past that even though you have a card that's graded, that has been looked over by a third party and said that this is a 7, especially for vintage cards, but maybe in the case of some modern cards, there's been some accusations that those cards have actually been trimmed to make it a 7. There's been examples, last couple years. I don't want to get into the whole issue of who's been accused and all this stuff, but supposedly there are examples out there of, a card that was previously a 6 was broken out of a slab, doctored, submitted, and now is a 7 or an 8, and they resold it for a lot more money. So you think you can trust, and for the most part, probably 99.5% of all the graded cards out there are fine. All right. But there's probably some examples out there that even though they've been authenticated, they could still be altered or fake cards, and are they really the grade that they say they are? And I've even heard some, maybe on some of the ultra modern cards, that there are now some fake holders that people are trying to, they'll buy a card in a certain grade, crack it out, put a lesser copy in, they have the same label or whatever, and then try to pass it on as that grade. And it's unfortunate that there are some shady things. And again, I think it's a very, very, very minor part of the whole grading in the hobby, but that also exists out there. And so you never truly know 100% that a graded card is what it says it is. So I know this has been a very long video. I hope you have watched through most of this. But I wanted to give you my take on grading sports cards, the good, the bad, the ugly. Again, let me know in the comments. What do you think about grading cards for your collection? Are you for grading or are you against grading? So if you haven't figured out from my pros and cons of what I prefer for my collection, here's what I prefer. For my Wade Boggs cards, I have no interest at all in getting them graded. I don't see the need or benefit. Um, I just, and the cost, again, of all of them that I have raw, it would just be I could put that money into a lot better use than submitting over 5,000 cards to get graded. So, Wade Boggs collection, raw, all the way, unless I happen to buy a card that someone lists and is graded. Okay, I may buy it. I have some. But Wade Boggs collection, raw. Vintage, unless I am working on a complete set like my 1978 tops, which I'm getting in raw. Moving forward, I'm not buying a single card unless it is PSA graded. Again, that's just my personal preference. I know the pros and cons and all that stuff. So let me know again what you prefer for your collection. And again, there is no right answer, there's no wrong answer. There's only the answer that makes sense for your collection and your interests. That's all I have for you. As always, thanks for watching. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Here are a couple other videos over here that I have recently posted, and if you're not a subscriber, would really appreciate you subscribing to my channel so you can check out some of my more videos as they get posted, and you can do so right here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.